The snow started just after 9. Lena Marsh noticed it the way she noticed most things that winter through glass. From a distance, with the quiet understanding that beauty was something that happened to other people. She was wiping down the counter at the diner when the first flakes touched the window. And for exactly 3 seconds, she let herself watch them fall before the bell above the door pulled her back. "Table 4 wants more coffee," said Darren, the line cook, without looking up. "I know," Lena said. She refilled the coffee. She cleared a booth. She wrapped her knuckles around a mug of hot water, not tea. She couldn't afford the bags and drank it standing up between the grill and the supply closet because that was the warmest corner of the building. It was her second shift of the day. The first had been at the dry cleaners on Halsted, 6 in the morning until noon, feeding other people's clothes into machines that smelled of chemicals so sharp they made her eyes water. Now it was past 10 at night, and she had 4 more tables to close before Marcus would let her leave. 22 years old, and she had already learned to count the hours differently than most people did. Lena Marsh was not extraordinary in the ways that mattered to the city around her. She had no college degree, no family to call, no apartment that wasn't technically a room. A single room in a building on the near north side, where the radiator banged like it was trying to escape, and the window above the fire escape didn't quite close all the way. She had a library card she used more than anything she owned. She had a winter coat that had been a good coat once, some years ago, before she inherited it from a woman at the shelter who'd found something warmer. What she had, mostly, was a habit of noticing when someone needed something. The old man 3 blocks from the diner. The one who stood at the same corner, every Tuesday, with a paper cup. She always had something for him, a roll wrapped in a napkin, the leftover soup from the back of the line. Once, a pair of wool socks she'd found folded on a bench in the park, clean enough, still good. Her coworker, Priya, had asked her once why she did it. "Because he's cold," Lena had said. "You're also cold," Priya pointed out. Lena had thought about that for a moment. "Yeah," she'd said. "But I'm used to it." That was the night in question, a Thursday in the 3rd week of February. Temperature sitting hard at 14 degrees with a wind off the lake that stripped the warmth from your face the moment you stepped outside. The diner closed at 11. By 11:15, Lena was walking. She walked because the bus fare was $2.50, and she had exactly $4.37 until Friday, which meant she needed to make choices. The distance wasn't terrible, 22 blocks, most of them straight. In good weather, she almost enjoyed it. Those quiet streets between midnight and 1, the city scaled down to something manageable. That night, she got as far as the corner of Dearborn and Polk before the ambulance passed her. She didn't think much of it. Ambulances were common enough that they'd become part of the city's grammar, part of its punctuation. Ordinary as a traffic light changing from red to green. She kept walking, but then she heard the second one, and a third, pulling hard around the corner ahead of her, lights strobing across the snow-glazed street. They were all going to the same place. St. Catherine's Medical Center was 2 blocks east, a building she passed every night on the way home. She'd never been inside. She didn't have insurance, which meant she avoided it the way you avoided streets where you owed someone money, but she knew it, the way you know the shape of a building you've circled often enough. She slowed without deciding to. Through the wide glass front of the emergency entrance, she could see people moving fast. The particular kind of fast that meant something was wrong, in a way that needed immediate correction. A gurney. A man on it, his arm hanging off the edge in a way that seemed too loose, too uncontrolled, to be okay. Lena stopped walking. "Keep going," said the sensible part of her. The part that knew she was tired and cold, and had to be at the dry cleaners by 6. "This isn't yours. This doesn't belong to you." She stood on the sidewalk in the snow and watched the gurney disappear through the double doors. Then she went inside. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee, and the particular staleness of recycled indoor air. The chairs were that specific shade of institutional gray that seems designed to discourage relaxation. There were maybe 12 people in them, most of them studying the floor or their phones, doing the quiet arithmetic of worry. Lena stood at the edge of the room, not sure why she'd come in. A woman in scrubs was walking fast past the reception desk, talking to another woman in scrubs. And Lena caught the end of the sentence without meaning to. AB negative, We have almost nothing in the bank. And the surgical team is asking, the first woman said something Lena didn't catch. The second woman shook her head. There's no time for a transfer from Rush. We need someone in this building. Right now. Or, she didn't finish it. She didn't need to. Lena's blood was AB negative. She knew this because she'd donated once before, 2 years ago, at a blood drive set up outside a library on Michigan Avenue. The technician had told her it was one of the rarest types. She'd asked why that mattered. The technician had smiled and said, because when someone with your blood type needs it, there usually isn't any. She stood very still for a moment. Then she walked up to the desk. The nurse's name was Patricia. She had it on her badge, Patricia Huang, RN, and she looked at Lena the way people sometimes looked at Lena, which was with the mild, involuntary assessment that came from taking in the worn coat, the wind-cracked hands, the general impression of someone who existed slightly outside the edges of where things were easy. Then Lena told her blood type. Patricia's expression changed entirely. You're sure, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I donated before. They told me then. When did you last eat? About 6 hours ago. Patricia was already reaching for a form. Are you a patient here? Any current medications? Recent illness? I'm fine, Lena said. I'm healthy. I heard you needed it. So, Patricia looked at her for a moment longer. Come with me, she said. The blood draw room was small and white and very bright. There was a reclining chair, the kind with adjustable armrests, and a tray of equipment that Lena tried not to look at directly. A technician named Marcus, different Marcus from her diner, this one younger, with wire-rimmed glasses, explained what would happen and asked her to sign. She signed. He asked if she was sure. She said yes. The needle went in. She looked at the wall. There was a poster about hand washing. She read it 3 times. You doing okay? Marcus asked. Fine, she said. You're not fine, he said, not unkindly. You went pale when I opened the package. I'm okay with needles, she said. I'm just tired. He didn't push it. They sat in silence for the next several minutes. The bag filling. The room very quiet. Who is he? Lena asked, eventually. I can't. I don't need his name. She stopped. Does he have kids? Marcus paused. He glanced at the door, then back at her. A daughter, he said carefully. She's 6. She's in the waiting room right now with a social worker. Her dad came in alone. Lena nodded slowly. Single dad? She asked. That's what it looks like. She was quiet for the rest of it. When Marcus removed the needle, she looked at the small white bandage on the inside of her elbow and felt, in some remote and inarticulate way, that it mattered, that there was a child in a waiting room right now, and that child's father was still alive in some part because of this particular evening, this particular coincidence of blood type and timing, and a girl who'd walked in from the cold without quite knowing why. She stood up too quickly. Marcus put a hand on her shoulder. Sit, he said. 5 minutes. Orange juice. He pressed a small cup into her hand. She sat. She drank the juice. It was very sweet and slightly too warm. Thank you, Marcus said. He has a daughter, she said again, quietly, mostly to herself. Yeah, Marcus said. He does. She gave him 5 minutes. And then she stood up again. And this time her legs held. She walked out through the waiting room without looking at the chairs. She didn't want to see the little girl. She didn't know why. Exactly, some instinct told her that seeing her would change something, make it real in a way that would be harder to carry home. The automatic doors opened. The cold hit her like a flat hand. She started walking. Her building didn't have a name the way some buildings did. It had a number 1847 and a super named Garrett who lived in the basement and fixed things approximately when he felt like it, and a smell in the stairwell that Lena had never been able to identify but which she associated now, inescapably, with the feeling of arriving home after midnight. She climbed 3 flights. Her room was at the end of the hall, number 12. The door had a lock that required a specific angle of pressure left, then in, then turned, and which she'd stopped finding frustrating about 2 months after she moved in. Now it was automatic. Left, in, turn. She pushed the door open and stood in the doorway. The room was cold. The radiator had been off since Tuesday. She'd told Garrett. Garrett had said he'd look at it. This was the extent of that relationship. The room held a bed, a small dresser, a wooden chair, a hot plate on a square of countertop that was also the kitchen, a bathroom through a narrow door on the left. There was a bookshelf made from milk crates, stacked against one wall. And the books on it were the things she'd accumulated slowly, from library sales and free shelf corners, and one summer, when she'd worked briefly at a used bookstore and had been paid partially in inventory. She kept the light off. The street light through the window gave enough. And she knew the room well enough that darkness was more comfortable than the single bulb overhead which flickered for approximately 30 seconds after you turned it on. She sat on the edge of the bed in her coat and looked at the floor. Her arm ached slightly where the needle had been. She pressed 2 fingers to the bandage, not hard. Just a light contact. Grounding herself, she thought about the little girl in the waiting room, 6 years old, sitting in an institutional gray chair, probably not fully understanding what was happening, but understanding enough to know that something was wrong with her father, that the people around her were very busy and very scared, that the world had in some way come loose from its normal grooves. Lena knew what that felt like. She had been 8 when her mother left, 12 when her grandmother died, 14 when the last of the arrangements fell apart, and she ended up in the first of several temporary places, each one a little more temporary feeling than the last. She was used to sitting in rooms that weren't quite hers, waiting for things that might not come. At least, she thought. Today, I did something that mattered. She lay down on top of the covers in her coat and pulled the thin blanket over her legs. Outside, the snow was still falling. She could hear it, almost the particular way the city quieted when the weather came down heavily enough, as though the buildings were leaning in, muffling themselves. She was asleep before she finished the thought. In the hospital, 5 blocks away and 2 floors up, a man opened his eyes. He lay still for a moment, reorienting. Ceiling tiles. Fluorescent light, the particular quality of hospital silence, which is not really silence at all but a continuous low hum of machines and distant voices, organized around the pretense of quiet. His name was Daniel Carter. He was 38 years old. He ran a company. He had a daughter named Emily, who was 6, who liked the color yellow and the letter E because it was the first letter of her name, who had recently decided that blueberries were the most important food and ate them at every possible meal. He had almost not come home to her. That was the thought that arrived first, before the pain in his side, before the awareness of the IV in his arm, before the institutional cold of the room. He had almost not come home to her. He had been in the back of a cab somewhere on the Eisenhower, some rupturing thing inside him working against him quietly, and then all at once, and the driver had pulled over and called 911, and someone had caught him before the sidewalk did, and then there had been a long, strange dark, and now this. The ceiling. The machines. A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Carter, you're awake. My daughter," he said. His voice came out rougher than he expected. "She's fine. She's downstairs with Dr. Romero from Pediatrics. She's been asleep in the family room for about 2 hours. She's safe." He let out a breath. "What happened to me?" the nurse explained, in the careful and slightly simplified language that medical professionals used when they weren't sure how much a patient could process. A rupture, blood loss. Surgery that had gone well, a transfusion that had made the difference. "Someone came in," the nurse said. "A young woman. She heard us talking about the shortage AB negative is rare, and she walked up to the desk and offered." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "She just walked in? Off the street? She was passing by. What was her name? I can't give out that information." "I'm sorry." He looked at the ceiling for a long time. Is she okay? Is she still here? She left about 2 hours ago." "She was fine. She refused anything we tried to give her something for her time. A voucher. She wouldn't take it." "She wouldn't take it," Daniel repeated. "No," the nurse said. He looked at the ceiling a while longer. Then he said, "I need to find her." Lena woke at 7 to the sound of the building's pipes groaning to life. Someone in the apartment above had run the shower, which was how she knew it was morning more reliably than any alarm. She lay in the cold of the room for the specific number of seconds it took her to remember everything that had to happen today. Dry cleaners at 8, lunch shift at the diner at noon, evening class. She'd enrolled in at the community center on Erie, a bookkeeping course, practical, designed for people exactly like her. She sat up, her arm ached. She made coffee on the hot plate. Not good coffee, the powdered kind. 2 scoops in a mug, boiling water from the kettle. She wrapped both hands around the mug and stood at the window and watched the street below, which was white and clean and quiet in the way streets are only very early in the morning after a heavy snow, before the city has had a chance to mark them again. She felt, unusually, at peace. It was a small thing, last night. She hadn't solved anything. She was still in this room, still cold, still $4 from Friday, but she'd done something that mattered to someone who had a daughter. And for right now, in this particular early morning light, that was enough. She got dressed. She wrapped a scarf around her twice. She put on the coat. She picked up her bag, canvas tote, worn at the handles, containing her keys, her wallet, a novel she was halfway through, and her work schedule for the week, and she opened the door to her room, and she walked down the hall toward the stairwell. She was on the second step down when she heard the sound from below. A car engine, idling. That was not unusual. But the quality of it was the low, expensive purr of something that didn't belong on this street. She kept walking, and as she came around the last turn of the staircase and pushed through the front door of the building into the cold air, she stopped. There was a black car at the curb. Not a taxi, not an Uber, the kind of car that had a name, the kind that cost more than Lena made in a year, possibly several years. Its surface so clean despite the snow-covered street that it looked almost unreal, like a piece of set dressing dropped into the wrong scene. A man in a dark coat stood beside it, and in front of the man, standing on the sidewalk with her boots planted and her small face tilted up toward the building's entrance, was a little girl. She had a yellow coat. She was looking directly at Lena. The world went very still. The little girl took one step forward. Her voice was small and serious, and very clear in the cold morning air. "Are you the one who saved my daddy?" Lena stood in the doorway of her building and looked at the little girl. And for a moment, she was not entirely sure the morning was real. "What?" she said. "The nurse said a lady with brown hair saved my daddy." The little girl studied her with the frank, unfiltered assessment of someone who had not yet learned the social protocols around staring. "You have brown hair. A lot of people have brown hair," Lena said carefully. "The nurse said she was young and she walked in from outside." That's Lena stopped. The man in the dark coat had come around the side of the car. In daylight, out of the context of a hospital bed, he looked different than she'd expected. She'd expected someone soft, perhaps, someone who looked like money, in the way that suggested its comfort. He didn't look soft. He was tall, and he moved carefully, the way someone moved when they were 2 days out from surgery and not supposed to push it. But he moved like someone who normally moved quickly, whose body expected more than it was currently being allowed. He had dark eyes that were presently doing something complicated. "You're her," he said. It was not a question. "You shouldn't be out of the hospital," Lena said. A small, startled sound, not quite a laugh, but in the family of laughs. "I checked myself out this morning," he said. "Against advice." "Why would you do that?" "Because I wanted to find you before you disappeared." He looked at her steadily. "You were gone before anyone could get your full name. The intake nurse remembered your first name, Lena. She remembered you were coming from a shift somewhere. She said you walked." A pause. "We asked if there were any all-night diners within walking distance of the hospital. You spent your morning calling diners. My assistant did. She's efficient." Lena looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the little girl, who was watching this exchange with the deep attention of someone filing everything away for later. "Emily," the man said. And his voice changed slightly, on the name a small, private thing, a frequency shift. "This is her." Emily looked at Lena with enormous seriousness. She stepped forward 2 more steps, which brought her to approximately Lena's waist height, and she held out her hand. It was a very formal gesture for a 6-year-old. Lena shook it. "I'm Emily Carter," Emily said. "My daddy is Daniel Carter." "You saved him." "I helped a little," Lena said. "You saved him," Emily repeated. With the implacability of someone who had decided on the truth of something and was not interested in revision, Lena looked up at Daniel Carter, who was watching his daughter with an expression that was many things at once: exhaustion and love and something raw and recently unburied. He caught Lena looking, and the expression settled into something more contained. Would you be willing to talk?" he said. "Somewhere warm. I know you're probably on your way somewhere." He paused. "I'd like to thank you." Properly. Lena thought about the dry cleaners. She thought about the 8 o'clock shift. She looked at Emily, who was still holding her hand. "There's a diner," she said, 3 blocks from here. They open at 7:30. The diner was not the one where she worked. It was called Carla's, and it had red vinyl booths and a counter with swivel stools, and a clock on the wall shaped like a rooster that had told the wrong time for as long as Lena had been going there, which was about a year. She liked it because the coffee was strong, and nobody rushed you. They took a booth near the window. Emily sat beside her father, on the side facing the street, and watched the snow-clearing truck with the deep attention she seemed to give everything. Lena sat across from them. Daniel wrapped his hands around a mug the way Lena had wrapped her hands around hers that morning. And she filed that away, that small mirroring, without knowing quite why. "I don't know how to start," he said. "You don't have to," she said. "I didn't do it for. It doesn't need a speech. I know you didn't do it for anything," he said. "That's the part that gets me." A pause. "You walked in off the street. You heard a half sentence of a conversation. You didn't ask anything. You didn't wait to be thanked. You just—" He stopped. Emily said, "Daddy cried this morning." "Emily," he said. "He did," she said, still watching the truck. "In the car. I saw him." Lena looked at the tablecloth. "She's 6, Daniel said, with the resigned warmth of someone who has accepted that his daughter is going to narrate his interior life regardless. She has no filter. "It's okay," Lena said. "I want to help you," Daniel said. "I know you're going to say no. You don't know that, because the nurse told me you refused the voucher, and she told me you asked about my daughter but you didn't wait to see her, and those 2 things tell me a lot about who you are." He looked at her steadily. "But I'd like you to let me try anyway." Lena was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window. The snow-clearing truck had moved on, and the street was scraped clean pale gray in the morning light. "I'm not going to take money from you," she said. Not sharply, just clearly. The way she said most things. "I'm not offering money." She looked back at him. "I have a company," he said. "We build infrastructure software, supply chain, logistics, the kind of systems that aren't glamorous but that need to work. We're growing fast. I need good people." He paused. "I need someone in the operations team who is organized and capable of staying calm when things go sideways. I don't know if you have any background in that." "I don't have a degree," she said. "I know. I work at a dry cleaners and a diner." "I know that too. You looked me up. I found out what I could from the diner." He met her eyes. "I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm trying to say that the things I know about your background don't change what I'm asking." Lena was quiet for a long time. Emily had, at some point, migrated from her father's side of the booth to directly beside Lena, in the manner of children who decide without announcement that they are now somewhere else. She was examining the laminated menu with intense focus. "Do they have blueberries?" Emily asked. "There might be a muffin," Lena said. "Is it a blueberry muffin? We can ask." Emily nodded, satisfied. She set the menu down and leaned very slightly against Lena's arm, the way a cat might lean, not asking for anything, just noting a warmth and adjusting her position relative to it. Something moved in Lena's chest. She ignored it. "Tell me about the job," she said to Daniel. He told her. He spoke carefully, without pressure, without making her feel like she was being evaluated. He talked about the work, the administrative coordination, the team management, the specific skills that were needed, and he talked about it the way someone talked who cared about what they were describing, who hadn't stopped finding it interesting. She asked questions. He answered them. Emily got a blueberry muffin. She ate it with the systematic attention she seemed to bring to all things. When Daniel finished, Lena looked at her coffee for a moment. "Why not just give me a check?" she asked. "It would be easier." "Easier for who?" She didn't answer. "I don't think you want to be given something," he said. "I think you'd spend the rest of your life trying to justify it to yourself." And I think you'd spend it feeling like you owed me." His voice was quiet and direct. "I'd rather owe you." She looked up. "You're already paid," she said. "That's not." "You can tell yourself that," he said. "But I'll be in debt for the rest of my life. I'd like to do something with that." A pause. "Let me." She didn't say yes that morning. She said she'd think about it. And she walked to the dry cleaners. And she stood at the machine for 6 hours. And she thought about it. She thought about it through the lunch shift at the diner, carrying plates of eggs and club sandwiches to people who didn't look at her, who looked at their phones, or at each other, or at some middle distance she could never quite locate. She thought about the job, the actual job, not the mythology of it, not the version where it solved everything. She was realistic, had always been realistic. She thought about what it would mean to sit at a desk in a building that had working heat, to do work that used the part of her brain she'd been feeding through library books and late-night study sessions because there was nothing else to spend her evenings on. She thought about Daniel Carter sitting across from her at a red vinyl booth, saying, "I'd rather owe you." She thought about Emily, leaning against her arm without asking permission. She thought about the thing that scared her most, which was not failure. Failure was familiar. She had failed at things and survived them. The thing that scared her most was the possibility of having something good, of walking into something warm, and then watching it become the next temporary thing, the next room at the end of a hallway that smelled of something she could never identify, the next arrangement that held for a while, and then fell apart in ways that were no one's fault in particular. She had a talent, developed young and honed through years of practice, for not wanting what she couldn't have. It was, she understood, a form of self-protection that looked from the outside like contentment. Most people took it for contentment. She had let them, but she was 22 years old, and she was tired of being realistic in the particular way that meant preventing herself from reaching for things. The bookkeeping class on Erie had a module on financial planning. The instructor, a compact woman named Sandra, who had the energy of someone who had solved her own problems and wanted others to do the same, had said something in the third week that Lena had written in the margin of her notebook. The cost of not trying is never zero. She had stared at it for a long time on the bus home. She thought about it again now, standing at the sink in the dry cleaners. Steam rising around her. Other people's clothes passing through her hands in an endless patient stream. She called the number he'd left on a business card, plain white, just his name and a number, nothing corporate, on her walk home 3 days later. He picked up on the second ring. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me. I want a real contract. Standard terms, not a favor-shaped thing. If I'm bad at the job, you fire me. If I'm good at the job, I get paid accordingly. Of course, I don't want anyone there to know why you hired me." There was a pause. "That's harder," he said. "I mean it. I want to walk in there as a person you hired because you think I can do the work. Not because I—" She stopped. "Not as a symbol." "Okay," he said. "I'll tell them you were referred by someone I trust." "That's true. That works." A pause. "Is there anything else?" he asked. "Not yet," she said. "But I'll tell you when there is." Another pause. And then, something that might have been a smile, transmitted through silence. "That works," he said. The office was on the 31st floor of a building on Wacker Drive. Which meant it had windows. Which meant it had a view Lena had previously only seen from the street below. The lake was gray and enormous. The city arranged itself around it in the particular way of Chicago. Bold and grid-shaped. Refusing weather. She started on a Monday in March. The work was hard. Not in a suffering way, in the way that good work is hard, that requires something from you, that has enough friction to be interesting. She was responsible for coordinating the operations team across 3 time zones, managing schedules, bridging the communication between departments that spoke different internal languages. There were software systems she had to learn. There were processes that made no sense until she traced them back to their origin and then made excellent sense. There were people who were, in the main, professionally cordial to the new hire, and not much more. There was a woman named Bridget Walsh, who had been with the company for 4 years, and who made it very clear, in the polite and technically unblameable way of someone who has mastered the art form, that she was not entirely certain about Lena. There was a man named Patrick Reeves in the engineering team, who went out of his way to explain things she hadn't asked to have explained. and who she later determined was not condescending, just enthusiastic, and so she adjusted her reading of him accordingly. There were early mornings when she sat at her desk, the city spread out behind her through the windows, and thought, "This doesn't belong to you. You don't fit here. Someone is going to figure that out." And then she would open the scheduling problem she'd been given and work on it until the voice quieted. She noticed, as the weeks passed, that the voice came less frequently, that something was happening that she didn't entirely have language for yet a calibration. The process of learning that you can do something, really learning it, not just believing it in the abstract but having it demonstrated to you daily through evidence. She was good at this. She was, genuinely, good at this. The problems she found interesting turned out to be the problems the team found hardest. The gaps she noticed turned out to be gaps that mattered. She bought 2 new work shirts at the end of her first pay period. Not expensive ones, she was still careful. Had not yet learned to be otherwise but actual work shirts, bought deliberately for this purpose. She hung them in the narrow closet of her room and looked at them for a moment before she turned off the light. Small thing. Everything that happened to Lena Marsh happened in small things. She saw Daniel occasionally in the hallway, in the glass-walled conference room, once in the elevator when neither of them said much because they were both early, and the building still had that particular morning silence. He was, in the context of the office, someone who moved differently than she'd seen him move in a hospital or a diner. Purposeful, slightly compressed, the way people got when they were always moving through things that needed them. He never referred to how she'd come to work there. She was grateful for that. One Friday afternoon, 6 weeks in, she was still at her desk at 6 o'clock, when most of the floor had already cleared out, working through a logistics report that had a recurring error she was determined to locate before leaving. She was close, she could feel the shape of it. That specific sensation of a problem yielding. You found it. She looked up. Daniel was standing at the edge of her workstation, holding 2 cups of coffee, looking at her screen. The discrepancy in the Portland data. "I've been trying to chase it for 2 weeks. She pointed at the column. Someone transposed 2 values in the master sheet. Everything downstream reflects the error. It's a 37-minute fix. He looked at the screen for a moment. "Bridget has 3 people who've been looking at that report," he said. "Sometimes fresh eyes are useful," she said carefully. He handed her one of the coffees without ceremony. She took it. "How are you?" he asked. Not in the performative, professional way. In the actual way. "Better than I was," she said. Which was true. "Good," he said. And then, because he was someone who apparently said things directly, "Emily asks about you." Lena looked at her screen. "Does she?" "About once a day. She wants to know if the lady from the snow is coming over." Lena smiled despite herself. She felt it on her face before she decided on it. "The lady from the snow," she repeated. "She named you that before she knew your actual name," he said. It stuck. He paused. "I told her I'd ask." Lena was quiet for a moment. "Tell her I might," she said. "On a weekend. She'll hold you to it," he said. "Good," she said, and meant it. The incident at the company event was Bridget Walsh's doing. Though Bridget would never frame it that way. It was April, a spring gathering. Casual Friday drinks in the communal space on 31, the kind of thing Lena usually navigated with the efficient friendliness of someone who had learned to be likable without being known. She was fine at these. She had been fine at them her entire life. She was standing near the window with a glass of sparkling water when she heard it. From a cluster of 3 people behind her, the particular social murmur that meant someone was being discussed rather than spoken to. "Doesn't quite fit, does she?" This was Bridget. Not a question. A man's voice, Patrick Reeves, she thought, which surprised her. "She's good at the job. She's adequate," Bridget said. "My concern is where she came from." Daniel's very close-lipped about it. "Just referred by someone I trust." The last phrase in light. Skeptical quotation marks. It's not a normal hiring process. A third voice, someone she didn't recognize. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm observing that she appeared from nowhere. That nobody in this industry had heard of her before February. And that Daniel is a pause. He's been through a lot this winter. He's not always thinking clearly. Lena set her glass down on the windowsill. She had two choices. She knew both of them. Intimately, she had been making this choice, in various forms, for most of her adult life. The first was to walk away, to let it go, to understand that this was the price of being somewhere you hadn't been born to, and to pay it quietly because it cost less than the alternative. The second was to turn around. She turned around. "Bridget," she said. Clearly, easily, the cluster of three pivoted toward her with varying degrees of composure. Bridget's was, to her credit, excellent. "I just want to be clear about something," Lena said. "I was hired because Daniel thought I could do the job. I think the Portland report, which I solved this week after 2 weeks of other people trying, is pretty decent supporting evidence for that." She looked at Bridget steadily. "I don't have a degree. I don't have an industry background. I do have the ability to find a transposed number in a 40-column spreadsheet at 6 o'clock on a Friday. If that's adequate, I'm fine with adequate. Silence. But I want to be clear," Lena continued, "that my being here is not a favor to me. It's a professional relationship. That's all it needs to be." She picked up her glass. She walked away. She was at the elevator when she heard footsteps behind her. She pressed the button for the lobby and waited. "Lena." It was Daniel. She turned. He'd been across the room. She hadn't known he was close enough to hear, but apparently he had been. "You didn't need to do that," she said. "I know," he said. I'm not here to defend you. You didn't need defending." "Then why?" "Because I want you to know," he said, "that you're here because you belong here. Not because he stopped. Not because of anything other than the fact that you are genuinely good at this." His voice was quiet and unhurried. "I should have—" Lena looked at him for a moment. "You were clear," she said. "I just needed some time to believe it." The elevator arrived. She got in. The doors began to close. Through the gap, she saw Emily's father standing in the hallway of a building on Wacker Drive, watching the doors close with an expression she was getting better at reading. She let herself look at it. It snowed in April. Not hard, a late-season softness, more light than substance, the kind that melts by noon and leaves no mark. But when Lena walked out of her building on a Saturday morning, there it was. The street dusted white. The air with that specific clarity that only came with new snow. She was on her way to Daniel's apartment. Not for work. She knew that. Had known it, with increasing clarity, since the evening he'd handed her a cup of coffee without ceremony, since the parking lot in February where Emily had shaken her hand with enormous formality. She'd been careful about it. Had taken her time, had let the professional layer establish itself fully before letting anything else near it. She was ready to let something else near it. The address was a building in the West Loop. Residential. The kind of building that had a doorman and a lobby with art in it. She gave her name. The doorman called up. She rode the elevator to the 7th floor. Emily opened the door. She was wearing a yellow shirt and paint-stained jeans and a look of absolute satisfaction. "I knew you'd come," she said. "You did? I said to Daddy that you'd come today. He said we'd see." "He was right to say we'd see," Lena said. "But I was right," Emily said. This was not wrong. The apartment was warm and smelled of coffee and something baking. It had bookshelves, real ones, floor to ceiling. The kind that made rooms feel inhabited rather than staged. There were drawings on the refrigerator and a yellow rug in the living room, and evidence everywhere of a child who was encouraged to take up space. Lena looked at it all and felt something settle in her chest, something she didn't have an immediate name for. Daniel came out of the kitchen. He looked different here than he did anywhere else she'd seen him. Easier. A flannel shirt, which she suspected was genuinely his and not a performance of casual. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her more and more lately, quietly, directly, as though checking something and finding it as expected. "You came," he said. "I said I might," she said. "On a weekend." She's been asking since Wednesday. Emily had already taken Lena's hand and was tugging her toward the living room with the purposeful energy of someone who had planned this extensively. "I have to show you my drawings," Emily said. "I made one of you." "Of me?" "Of the lady from the snow." Emily said it without self-consciousness. The way she said everything, as though the world were simply the thing it was. "It's mostly the coat." "My coat is memorable," Lena agreed. They sat on the yellow rug. the three of them, while Emily distributed drawings with the curatorial authority of someone presenting an exhibition. Daniel sat across from Lena, his back against the couch, a cup of coffee on the floor beside him, and they listened to Emily explain each drawing. This one was the hospital, this one was the snow, this one was what she thought Lena's room looked like, which was vivid and wildly inaccurate, and somehow exactly right. Lena looked at the drawing of herself. Brown hair, large eyes, a coat rendered in heavy crayon strokes, and standing in a doorway. And all around the figure small blue marks that Emily had apparently decided were snowflakes, but which were arranged not falling randomly but almost circling, like a frame, like something precious being held. "This is you saving him," Emily said simply. In the snow, Lena looked at the drawing for a long moment. "I was just walking past," she said, very quietly. Emily shook her head. "You stopped," she said. "That's the important part. You stopped." There was a particular clarity to the way 6-year-olds said true things. They didn't build up to them, didn't apologize for them, didn't hedge them with qualifiers. They said them because they were true, the way Emily said everything directly, as though the world were simply the thing it was, and it was strange that anyone would find that complicated. Lena held the drawing carefully. The crayon coat. The circling snow. She had been 17 years old the first time she understood that kindness was a choice rather than a reflex. She had been in the third of the temporary arrangements, living with a woman named Helen, who had 2 cats and a front porch and a rule about shoes at the door, and who one afternoon had brought Lena a cup of tea without being asked, without comment, without any expectation of thanks, and had set it on the table beside her book and walked back to the kitchen as though the gesture were entirely ordinary. It was entirely ordinary. That was the thing Lena had taken with her. Not the gesture itself, but the understanding it represented. That ordinary kindness, done without performance and without account, keeping, was what made the difference between a world that held together and one that didn't. You didn't do it because someone would see. You did it because you happened to be there. And you could. And that was enough reason. She had lived by that for 5 years. Given rolls to the man at the corner, stitched up the broken hem on a stranger's coat at a shelter, walked into a hospital on a February night because she heard a half sentence and her blood type happened to match. She had never expected it to come back to her like this. Outside, the late-season snow was already melting. The morning light was coming through the windows at a low angle, the specific gold of early spring, and it fell across the yellow rug and the drawings spread out on it, and the three of them sitting there in the warmth of an ordinary Saturday. In her worn coat, which she still wore, and would wear until it finally gave out, because it was hers and she'd earned it. Lena Marsh looked at the drawing and felt, for the first time in a long time, something she recognized as home, not the room on the 3rd floor of a building with a broken radiator. Not the dry cleaners, not the diner. Not any of the temporary places she'd learned to make do in. This specific warmth. This specific quality of being seen. Emily had, in the manner of 6-year-olds everywhere, moved on from the exhibition to something else, a board game she was extracting from a low shelf, with the focused energy of someone who had already decided what was happening next, and was simply waiting for the adults to catch up. She narrated the process in an even undertone, listing the rules of the game as she understood them, which was with considerable confidence and some creative interpretation. Daniel was watching his daughter the way Lena had seen him watch her before, with that particular combination of exhaustion and love that seemed to be the specific texture of his affection, as though being Emily's father was the one thing in his life he had no distance from. He glanced up and found Lena looking. He didn't look away, neither did she. "Thank you," he said quietly. She looked up. He was watching her. "I know you didn't do it for anything," he said. "I know you'd say it wasn't about us. That you'd have done it for anyone." He paused. "I believe you. And I'm still glad it was you." Lena held the drawing carefully in both hands. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and directionless. The way things ended and began at the same time. She had walked in from the cold. She had been walking in from the cold for as long as she could remember. But now, finally, there was somewhere warm on the other side of the door, and someone had left it open.